The hall was filled with the soft murmur of voices and the sound of chairs being moved. Bright lights reflected off the grand piano on stage, making it look almost magical. People had gathered from all over the city to witness something unusual that day, a music audition unlike any other. The stage wasn't just set for music. It was set for a life-changing promise. The CEO of one of the biggest music companies in the country had made an announcement that shocked everyone. He had promised that if any orphan could move his heart through music, he would personally adopt that child. Some thought it was an act of kindness. Others whispered it was just a show to make headlines. But for one quiet girl standing near the back, it was something much deeper. Her name was Lila. She was no older than 12, wearing a simple dress that was too small for her and shoes that had lost their shine long ago. She came from a small orphanage at the edge of the city, a place where dreams often faded before they began. Yet today she held onto one dream tightly, that maybe, just maybe, someone would see her heart through her music. Lila had grown up surrounded by silence. The orphanage was always busy, full of chores, noise, and laughter that never truly reached her. But in one quiet corner of the old building stood a dusty piano. The keys were yellowed and some didn't play at all, but to her it was the most beautiful thing in the world. It was the only thing that ever made her feel close to her mother, who had taught her a few notes before she passed away. Every evening when the other children went to bed, Lila would sneak down to that piano. She would place her small fingers on the keys and play softly, just enough to hear the melody without waking anyone. She played not because someone asked her to, but because it made her heart feel alive. When she heard about the CEO's offer, the caretaker at the orphanage laughed at first. "They're not serious, Lila," she said kindly. "Big people say big things." But Lila didn't hear the doubt. She only heard one thing, and a promise. A promise that if her music was good enough, she might find a home. So when the day of the audition came, she woke up before sunrise. She wore her best dress, the one the other girls had patched for her, and tied her hair neatly with a small ribbon. The caretaker gave her a small lunchbox and hugged her tight. "Play from your heart," she whispered. "That's where your real music lives." The city felt like a different world to her. Tall buildings, shining cars, and people who didn't stop to look at one another. When she reached the concert hall, the crowd outside was much bigger than she had imagined. Dozens of contestants waited in line, most of them much older and dressed beautifully. Some had their own instruments. Others came with teachers or parents who spoke loudly about how talented their child was. Lila stood quietly in the corner, holding her small number card in her hand. No one noticed her. The people at the registration desk looked at her with surprise when she said she came from an orphanage. One woman whispered to another, and they both smiled politely but not kindly. Lila didn't understand their looks, but she didn't care. She wasn't there for their approval. Inside, the hall was grand and cold. Rows of chairs faced a large stage, and at the center of that stage stood a black grand piano that looked so perfect, it almost scared her. She could see her own reflection in it. Around her, people were practicing, humming, or talking about what songs they would play. The CEO sat in the front row wearing a dark suit. His expression was serious, almost distant. People said he was a man who didn't show emotion. He had built his company from nothing and didn't believe in second chances. But there was something else about him, something that made even confident musicians nervous. They said he could tell whether a song was real or fake within a few seconds. When the audition began, one performer after another walked up proudly and played. Some were skilled, their fingers flying over the keys, their songs full of energy. The audience clapped politely, but the CEO didn't move. His face stayed the same, calm, cold, unreadable. Lila sat at the far end, waiting for her turn. She could feel her heart beating so fast that she pressed her hands against her chest to calm herself. She looked around and saw the other contestants whispering. One of them, a boy wearing a shiny vest, pointed at her and smirked. "She's from the orphanage, right? Maybe she'll play with one hand." The others laughed quietly. Lila looked down, pretending she didn't hear. She told herself that the piano didn't care who she was or where she came from. The piano only cared about what was inside her heart. As the numbers were called, she knew her turn was coming closer. The sound of clapping and footsteps faded in her ears as she kept repeating in her mind, "Play from your heart, play from your heart." Finally, she heard her name. A hush fell over the hall as she stood up. She walked slowly toward the stage, her small shoes tapping softly against the wooden floor. The light above her was too bright, and for a moment she couldn't see anyone. Not the judges, not the audience. Just the piano. She walked up to it like it was an old friend. Her hands trembled slightly as she sat down on the bench. The stage crew had placed a cushion on it earlier for the younger contestants, but she didn't need it. She had practiced sitting on that same old piano stool at the orphanage for years. From the corner of her eye, she saw the CEO glance up, but only for a moment. He didn't seem interested. Someone coughed in the audience, and a few people looked down at their phones. She could feel her throat tighten. Then she took a deep breath and placed her fingers on the keys. The first note was soft, almost hesitant, but it rang through the hall like a drop of rain falling into still water. Then came another note and another, until a slow, gentle melody filled the air. The sound wasn't perfect, her touch was light and her rhythm uneven, but there was something honest about it. As she played, her fear began to fade. Her fingers started to move the way they always did when no one was watching. The song she had chosen wasn't from any book. It was her own melody. One she had written on the broken piano at the orphanage, on nights when she couldn't sleep. It was a song about longing, about the sound of rain on the roof, about laughter in the distance, about the hope that one day someone would walk through the orphanage door and say, "You're coming home with me." She closed her eyes as she played, forgetting the hall, the audience, even the CEO. For a few moments, she wasn't on a stage anymore. She was back in the small room at the orphanage, her hands moving over chipped keys, her heart speaking louder than her voice ever could. People began to notice. The laughter stopped. The whispers faded. One by one, heads lifted. Something about the melody touched them. It was simple but deep, the kind of music that made you remember things you thought you'd forgotten. Even the CEO stopped writing in his notebook. He looked up, his expression softening slightly. For the first time that day, there was a flicker of emotion in his eyes. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, listening carefully. The song grew stronger, rising and falling like a wave. Some people in the audience looked around at each other, surprised by what they were feeling. They didn't know where this little girl had learned to play like that. It wasn't the skill, it was the soul behind the music. When the last note faded, silence filled the room. Lila opened her eyes slowly, unsure if she had done well or not. No one clapped right away. Everyone just sat there as if they didn't want to break the moment. Then softly, the CEO put down his pen. The faint sound of his applause started, steady and slow, and soon the whole hall joined in. The sound of clapping grew louder until it filled every corner of the room. Lila didn't smile. She just looked around, almost dazed, as if she couldn't believe what had just happened. For the first time in her life, people weren't looking through her. They were looking at her. And somewhere in the crowd, the CEO's gaze stayed fixed on her. A thoughtful look in his eyes that no one could quite read. She didn't know it then, but that single moment, the touch of her hands on the piano, had already started to change everything. After the applause died down, Lila felt a strange mix of relief and nervousness. She stood quietly at the edge of the stage, unsure whether the CEO's expression meant anything. Some of the other contestants were glaring at her, while others whispered to each other. The air was thick with surprise, envy, and curiosity. None of it mattered to Lila. All she could think about was the piano, the sound she had just played, and the hope that maybe, just maybe, she had made a difference. The next contestant was called, and Lila stepped aside, her small hands still trembling. She watched as another child walked onto the stage. This child had practiced all morning, or so it seemed, with a teacher standing behind them, whispering encouragements. The contrast between the polished, confident performance and Lila's quiet, heartfelt song was clear. Some people began to talk among themselves. "Did you hear the orphan girl's song?" a woman whispered. "It was different. I don't know why, but it stayed with me." Others shook their heads. "It wasn't perfect," one boy said. "Her timing was off and she hesitated sometimes." "That's true," another replied, "but there was something real about it. You could feel her heart." Lila listened silently. She didn't care if people judged her performance. She had played the way she always played, honestly, without pretense. It was the first time anyone had truly listened. Once the last contestant finished, the judges and the CEO began conferring quietly among themselves. Lila was told to wait on the side, and she perched on the edge of the stage, her legs swinging slightly. She felt exposed but strangely calm. Every other child had someone encouraging them, whether a parent, a teacher, or a mentor. She had no one but herself. But today that might be enough. The hall was slowly emptying and the murmurs of the crowd had become soft chatter. Contestants were packing up their instruments or chatting nervously with each other. Lila stayed still, her mind still on the melody that had left her fingers moments ago. She tried to imagine what it sounded like to the people in the room, and whether it had reached the CEO's heart. The CEO finally approached her. He was taller than she remembered, and his eyes held a seriousness that made her small hands fidget nervously. He didn't smile, and yet there was something in the way he looked at her. A quiet respect. Almost like he had seen something he hadn't expected. "You played a piece that wasn't written in any book," he said softly, almost to himself. "It came from somewhere else." Lila nodded, unsure of how to respond. Her voice caught when she finally spoke. It's a song I made. I play it every night." He leaned down slightly, closer than she expected, and asked, "Every night?" "Yes," she whispered. "At the orphanage, on the old piano. No one listens. But it helps me feel like she's here." Her voice trembled and she looked at the floor. She didn't know if he would understand. For a moment, the CEO said nothing. He straightened, his face unreadable again. Then he walked back a few steps and nodded toward the piano. "Sit," he said simply. Lila's eyes widened. "Me?" she asked, unsure if she had heard correctly. "Sit," he repeated. "Play again." The audience had mostly gone, but a few staff members lingered. Lila walked slowly to the piano, her heart beating faster than ever. She wasn't sure why he wanted to hear her again. Was it to test her? Or was it to see the music itself? As she placed her fingers on the keys, she remembered all the nights she had practiced in the quiet orphanage. Each note was a piece of her story, her loneliness, her memories of her mother, her dreams of a family. The sound that came from her hands wasn't perfect, but it carried truth. She played, letting the notes rise and fall, filling the empty hall with something warm and alive. The CEO listened carefully. He didn't take notes, he didn't speak, he just listened. And as he listened, his expression softened. Something deep inside him seemed to stir, memories and feelings he hadn't touched in years. For him, this was more than music. It was a story, a mirror of life, and a connection he hadn't expected. As the song ended, the hall was quiet again. Lila kept her hands on the keys, unsure if she should move. Finally, he spoke. "You have a way of reaching people," he said slowly. "Not just with skill, but with honesty. That is rarer than talent." Lila felt warmth spread in her chest. No one had ever said such words to her. No one had ever seen the effort, the heart, or the countless nights of practice. For the first time, someone recognized her not just for what she could do, but for who she was inside. While she tried to process his words, the other contestants gathered their things and began to leave. Some glanced at her with envy. Some whispered that it wasn't fair that an orphan could move the CEO so much. Others avoided looking at her at all. But none of it mattered. Lila had heard something more important than applause. The CEO beckoned her to follow him backstage. The room was smaller, quieter, and filled with papers, instruments, and staff moving about. He motioned for her to sit on a small chair, and he sat across from her. "I have seen many auditions in my life," he said, his voice calm but serious. "Some are technically perfect. Some are charming. Some are forgettable. But very few touch the heart. You did that." Lila looked down at her hands. She wasn't sure what to say. I just play what I feel," she whispered. "That is exactly why it works," he said. "Most people play to impress. You play to express. That is something money, fame, or training cannot teach. That is something you are born with." Her eyes grew wide. She had never thought anyone would understand. At the orphanage, her songs were ignored, forgotten, or dismissed as child's play. But here, in this quiet office, she felt seen. Truly seen. He leaned forward slightly. "I promised that I would adopt a child who could move me. That promise still stands. But I need to know one thing. Are you ready for the responsibility that comes with it? Being part of a family, living somewhere new, being seen by the world." Lila swallowed hard. The words were heavy. She had dreamed of a family, of having someone care for her, someone to guide her. But she had also learned that dreams could disappear quickly. Still, she nodded. I am ready," she said, her voice steady. He studied her for a long moment. Then he smiled. A small, careful smile, but genuine. "Very well," he said. "You will have a chance. But there is more to see first." I need to understand your music, your life, and your courage. We will do this step by step. Back in the hall, staff began to prepare for other activities. Lila was led to a quiet corner where she could sit and rest. For the first time, she felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She had played her heart, and someone had truly listened. The thought was almost dizzying. The day passed slowly after that. Lila was given water and a small snack. She watched as other contestants returned to practice or left with their families. She realized she had no family waiting for her outside. The orphanage was far away, and the thought of returning there made her stomach twist. But somehow the fear didn't feel as heavy anymore. She thought about the CEO's words. Play to express, not to impress. She repeated them quietly to herself, and the melody from the piano came back in her mind. She could still hear the echoes of the hall, the soft resonance of each note. It reminded her that music was not just sound. It was a bridge, a way to connect hearts. Hours later, as the sun began to set, the staff started packing up. Lila was led back to the side entrance of the hall. The CEO appeared briefly and nodded to her. Rest. Tomorrow will be another important day. Be ready, he said. Lila nodded, feeling a strange mixture of excitement and nervousness. She had no idea what tomorrow would bring, but she knew that something had begun. A change in her life she could never have imagined. That night, as she lay in the small guest room the staff had provided, she thought about the piano. She closed her eyes and played the melody in her mind. Each note told a story, her story, and she felt a little stronger, a little braver. For the first time, she didn't feel like a lonely orphan. She felt like someone with a place in the world, someone whose music, whose heart could matter. And though the road ahead was uncertain, she was ready to follow it one note at a time. The first step had been taken. The rest of the journey, the challenges, the doubts, and the surprises, lay ahead. But Lila had learned something important that day. Sometimes all it takes is one honest note to change everything. The next morning, Lila woke up feeling a mix of excitement and nervousness. She had slept in a small guest room provided by the staff, and though it was quiet and simple, it felt strange to be somewhere so different from the orphanage she had always known. Her heart beat faster as she thought about the events of the previous day. She had played her song, and the CEO had listened. He had even promised that he wanted her to be part of his life if she could show him more of her music and her courage. Breakfast was simple, and the staff treated her kindly, but there was a seriousness in the air. Today wasn't just another audition. It felt like the start of something bigger. They told her that she would meet the CEO again, and that he wanted to know more about her life and her music. Lila's stomach twisted with both fear and hope. She wasn't sure she was ready for all the questions or the attention, but she remembered the advice of the caretaker back at the orphanage. Play from your heart. Show who you really are. When she entered the hall, it felt different from yesterday. The seats were mostly empty, but the air still carried tension. The CEO was already there, standing near the piano, looking at some notes. When he saw her, he gave a small nod. Lila walked slowly, her hands fidgeting at her sides. He motioned for her to sit beside the piano, and for a moment silence filled the room. You played yesterday as if your heart was speaking, he said, but I want to know more about you. Not just the music, but the story behind it. Why do you play? What makes your music yours? Lila took a deep breath. She had never spoken about her mother or the nights at the orphanage to anyone outside the walls of that small building. Her voice shook as she started to tell the story. She spoke of her mother, of the few simple lessons she had received, of the nights she spent playing when the rest of the children slept. She told him about the old piano in the orphanage, the broken keys, and the way it had always been her comfort. The CEO listened quietly, his eyes never leaving her face. He didn't interrupt, but occasionally he nodded as if he understood. When she finished, she felt a strange mix of relief and fear. She had shared so much of herself in words, and now it felt like her heart was on the table, open for judgment. You have lived a life full of challenges, he said softly, but you have also created beauty in the face of them. That is rare. For the first time, Lila noticed something behind his eyes, a softness, a memory that connected with her story. She didn't know what it was, but it made her feel less small. She realized that perhaps he had seen loss in his own life just like she had. After the conversation, he asked her to play again. This time, he didn't want her to play the same song. He wanted to see her imagination, her ability to create new music from scratch. Lila's fingers trembled as she placed them on the keys. The room was silent except for the soft hum of the piano. She closed her eyes and let her thoughts guide her hands. A new melody emerged, one that was gentle and flowing, filled with hope and curiosity. It was different from the song she had played before. Lighter, more playful, yet still deeply honest. Each note carried a part of her soul, a part of the story she hadn't told in words. As she played, the CEO leaned forward slightly, his expression changing with each note. He didn't just listen to the sound. He listened to the story within it. He noticed the pauses where her mind hesitated, the strength in her crescendos and the tenderness in her soft passages. For him, it was as if the music itself was revealing her character. When the song ended, he remained quiet for a long moment. Lila opened her eyes, unsure if she had done well. Then he clapped, not loudly but slowly with purpose. "That was remarkable," he said. "You are not just talented. You are brave. You create music from your heart, and that is something no one can teach." Lila felt tears prick at her eyes. She had never been praised for her creativity or her courage. People at the orphanage had sometimes listened, sometimes ignored her, and sometimes laughed at her attempts. But here, in this hall, someone recognized her for exactly who she was. The day continued with more conversations and small tests of her musical ability. She was asked to play different styles, happy, sad, slow, fast, and each time she found a way to express herself through the keys. The staff around her were kind but professional, taking notes and making observations. Lila focused entirely on the piano, letting her heart guide her fingers. During a break, she sat quietly by a window, watching the sunlight fall across the hall. She thought about the orphanage, about the children who would be waiting for her return, and about the life she might have if the CEO kept his promise. Her mind raced with both excitement and fear. Could she really leave the only home she had ever known? Could she adapt to a new life, a new family? Before she could dwell too much on these thoughts, the CEO returned. He gestured for her to follow him to a small room filled with instruments and music sheets. "I want to show you something," he said. He handed her a sheet of music, simple at first glance, but with an unusual rhythm and subtle harmonies. "This is a piece I composed years ago," he explained. "Try to interpret it in your own way." Lila studied the sheet. At first it seemed difficult, with notes and rhythms she hadn't seen before. But as she touched the keys, she began to hear her own voice in the composition. She experimented, adjusting the tempo, emphasizing certain notes and softening others. Slowly, she made the piece her own. The CEO watched closely, occasionally smiling. "You don't just play the notes," he said. "You tell the story. That is the difference between a performer and a true musician." Hours passed. Lila played and practiced, her hands growing tired but her heart growing stronger. She realized that music wasn't just about performing. It was about expressing who she was, showing her emotions and experiences through sound. Every note she played was a piece of herself, shared with someone who truly understood. As evening approached, the CEO finally called an end to the day's activities. "You have done well," he said. "Tomorrow we will explore more, but for now rest. You have shown courage, honesty, and a remarkable gift." Lila nodded, feeling both exhausted and exhilarated. For the first time in her life, she felt like someone believed in her completely. She thought about the road ahead, the challenges, the lessons, and the possibility of a family, and felt a small, growing confidence inside her. That night she lay in bed, her mind replaying every moment of the day. She thought about the songs she had played, the melodies she had created, and the words the CEO had said. She remembered the first note she had played yesterday, and how it had echoed in the hall, touching not just the audience but the heart of a man she had never met before. For the first time, Lila allowed herself to dream beyond the orphanage. She imagined waking up in a home filled with warmth, having someone who would care for her, guide her, and share in her life. She imagined music lessons that would help her grow, friends who would understand her, and a future where her songs could reach the hearts of many. But even as she dreamed, she knew that the journey was just beginning. There would be tests, doubts, and obstacles to overcome. Not everyone would believe in her. Some might try to discourage her. Some might not understand her music or her heart. But she also knew one thing: she had a gift and she had courage. And as long as she played from her heart, she could face whatever came next. The next morning, she woke up early, her heart filled with determination. She knew the CEO would want to see her again. to hear more of her music and to understand her spirit even better. She dressed carefully, tying her ribbon neatly in her hair, and took a deep breath before stepping into the hall. As she walked in, the staff greeted her warmly, and she noticed the piano waiting for her, shining in the morning light. She felt a sense of calm wash over her. She was ready. She had come this far, and she would continue one note at a time. The CEO was already seated at the front, waiting. When he saw her, he nodded, and for the first time, Lila felt like she was not just a contestant, but someone who mattered. She had a voice, a story, and a heart that could reach others, and that day she would show it again. She sat at the piano, placed her fingers on the keys, and let the music flow. Each note was filled with hope, courage, and a quiet determination. For Lila, the piano was more than an instrument. It was a bridge to a future she had never dared to imagine. And as the melody grew, she felt the walls of fear and doubt crumble, leaving only her music, her heart, and the promise of a life that was waiting for her, if she was brave enough to reach for it. The morning air was calm and quiet as Lila arrived at the hall. The previous days had already changed her life in ways she was still trying to understand. She felt nervous, yes, but there was also a sense of purpose now, a feeling that she was part of something bigger than herself. For the first time, she realized that music could open doors she had never imagined, and that her life could be more than the small, familiar walls of the orphanage. The staff greeted her with warm smiles, and she noticed that preparations were being made for a more personal session with the CEO. Today would not be just about playing the piano. It would be about understanding her, her emotions, and the depth behind the music she created. She walked slowly toward the grand piano, her fingers brushing lightly against the keys as she approached. The CEO was waiting for her at the front of the hall, his expression unreadable as always. Yet there was a softness in his eyes that had not been there on the first day. When he saw her, he gestured for her to sit. "Good morning," he said quietly. "Today, we will go a little deeper. I want to know not only what you can play, but why you play. Your music carries emotion, and I want to understand the stories behind it." Lila nodded, feeling a flutter of nervous excitement. She took a deep breath and sat on the piano bench. The first notes she played were soft, reflective. Not a song she had prepared, but something that came directly from her heart in that moment. The melody rose and fell with her breathing, gentle and honest. She closed her eyes and let the emotions guide her hands. The CEO listened silently, leaning forward slightly. There was no writing, no notes being taken. He was fully present, focused entirely on the music. As the song continued, he noticed the subtle shifts in tone, the pauses where her fingers hesitated, and the moments where she poured pure feeling into the keys. It was a language without words, yet it spoke more clearly than anything she had ever said aloud. When the melody ended, there was a moment of quiet. Lila opened her eyes and looked at him, unsure of what he thought. He sat back and let out a soft sigh. "There is a story here," he said slowly. "A story of longing, of hope, and of courage. Tell me, what inspired this piece?" Lila hesitated. She had never shared much of her life outside the orphanage. The words felt heavy in her mouth, but she knew she had to try. I think about my mother," she said softly. "She taught me the first few notes on a piano before she passed away. Every night I play to feel close to her. Sometimes it's happy, sometimes it's sad, but it's always mine." The CEO nodded, and for the first time he allowed a small, almost invisible smile to appear. "Music is a way to keep memories alive," he said. "And you have done that beautifully. You carry her memory in a way that touches others, not just yourself." "That is rare." Lila's chest tightened. She had always thought her music was private, something she shared only with empty walls. But now, someone important was seeing the heart behind it, and it felt overwhelming and wonderful at the same time. She realized that music was not just a comfort for herself, but a bridge to connect with others, even those she had never met. The CEO handed her another piece of sheet music. This one was more complex, filled with unfamiliar notes and rhythms. "This is a composition I started many years ago," he explained. "It is unfinished, and I want you to interpret it in your own way. Don't just play it. Make it yours." Lila studied the sheet. At first it seemed intimidating, the notes twisting and turning in ways she had never played. But as she touched the keys, she began to hear her own voice within the music. She adjusted the tempo, emphasized certain notes and softened others. Slowly, the composition began to take on her personality, her emotion, and her understanding. The CEO observed closely. "You are not just following instructions," he said quietly. "You are adding yourself to it. That is what transforms music into art. That is what gives it life." As she continued, the melody grew, flowing from her heart to the piano and out into the hall. The sound was soft at first, then strong and confident, carrying with it the mixture of her past experiences and her hopes for the future. She realized that each note was telling a story, her story, and that the piano was giving her a voice she had never truly had before. When she finally paused, the hall was quiet except for the soft hum of the piano's lingering notes. The CEO stood and walked toward her, his eyes thoughtful. "You are talented," he said. "But more importantly, you are brave. Your music is not perfect, but it is real. That is what makes it extraordinary." Lila's hands shook slightly, but she smiled faintly. For the first time, she felt seen, truly seen. All her efforts, all the nights of practicing in silence had led to this moment, and she understood that this journey was bigger than a single performance. It was about sharing who she was, her courage and her heart, with the world. The CEO gestured for her to follow him to a small room behind the hall. It was quiet and filled with instruments of all kinds, some she had never seen before. "I want to show you something," he said, motioning to a new piano, larger and more beautiful than the one she had been playing. "This piano is for you to explore. Try to create something new, something that reflects your thoughts and feelings right now." Lila approached the piano slowly. Her fingers hovered above the keys, unsure where to start. But then, she thought about her life, her mother, the orphanage, and the hope that had brought her here.
She began to play.
The melody started softly, uncertain at first, then grew into a flowing, expressive piece. Every note carried her emotions, her longing, her joy, her fear, and her hope. The CEO watched silently. He didn't interrupt, didn't comment, simply let her express herself. And as he listened, he felt a connection forming, not just through the music, but through the girl herself. He could sense the depth of her experiences, the strength of her character, and the honesty in her expression. After a long time, Lila stopped. Her hands trembled slightly, but she felt a sense of peace she had never known. The melody had been her voice, her story, shared without words. The CEO remained quiet for a moment, then spoke. "You have something rare," he said softly. "Not just talent, but understanding. You know how to feel music, how to make it live. That is more important than technique or fame." Lila felt her eyes grow wet, but she held back tears. For the first time, someone was acknowledging not only her ability, but her heart. She realized that the journey ahead would not be easy, but she now had a sense of purpose. She understood that music was not just about notes on a page. It was about telling a story, connecting hearts, and expressing what words often cannot. The day passed with more practice and gentle guidance from the CEO. He didn't push her, didn't rush her, but he challenged her to explore, to create, and to understand herself better through music. Lila discovered parts of herself she had never known: confidence, imagination, and a growing sense of courage. By evening, she was exhausted but exhilarated. The CEO gave her a small nod of approval. "You have grown today," he said, "not just in skill but in understanding. Music is a journey, and you are learning not just to play, but to live it." As she prepared to leave, Lila thought about the orphanage, about the children waiting for her, and about the life that might soon be hers. She felt both nervous and excited. She knew that leaving her home, even for a better life, would not be simple, but she also knew that she had the courage to face it, the strength to take the next step, and the music to guide her. That night, as she lay in bed, she reflected on the day's events. She remembered the moments of quiet connection, the way her music had spoken without words, and the understanding she had received. She realized that the piano was not just an instrument, it was a friend, a confidant, and a bridge to the world she had always dreamed of. For the first time, Lila allowed herself to imagine a future beyond the orphanage. She imagined a home filled with warmth and laughter, a family who would care for her, and opportunities to share her music with others. She imagined herself growing, learning, and creating, not just for herself, but for anyone who might need to hear the story of her heart. She also knew that the journey was far from over. There would be challenges, doubts, and moments of fear. Some people might not understand her. Some might question her abilities or her worth, but she had learned an important truth. Courage, honesty, and heart were more powerful than fear or doubt. The next day would bring new experiences, new challenges, and new opportunities to grow. Lila felt ready. She had already taken the first steps, and she knew that each note she played, each melody she created, would bring her closer to the life she had dreamed of. And so, with a quiet determination, she closed her eyes and imagined the next melody, knowing that her heart would always guide her hands, her story would always guide her music, and her courage would carry her forward. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of the music hall, casting golden light across the polished floor. Lila entered with a quiet determination, feeling the weight of the past few days and the promise of what might come. She had grown in ways she hadn't realized, stronger, braver, and more certain of her own voice. Today, she knew, was important. There was an energy in the air that felt different, almost electric, as if something significant was about to happen. The hall was mostly empty, but the grand piano sat in the center of the stage, gleaming under the morning light. Staff moved quietly, preparing the space for what seemed to be a private session with the CEO. He was already there, standing with his usual composed expression. When he saw Lila, he gestured for her to approach. "Good morning," he said, his voice calm but carrying a hint of anticipation. "Today I want to see more than your music. I want to see your courage, your heart, and your spirit. We have come far, but this step is important. Are you ready?" Lila nodded, her hands tightening slightly. She had faced her fears before, but today felt different. It was not just about playing music. It was about showing her life, her story, and her readiness for a future she had only begun to imagine. She sat at the piano and closed her eyes, letting her hands hover above the keys. The room was silent except for the faint rustle of paper and the distant sound of staff moving around. She took a deep breath and began to play. The melody was gentle at first, almost like a whisper, but it quickly grew into something richer, stronger, and filled with emotion. Each note carried her memories. The nights at the orphanage, the moments of loneliness, the warmth of her mother's brief lessons, and the small sparks of hope that had guided her through the darkest times. The music flowed naturally, as if it had been waiting for this moment to be heard. The CEO listened carefully, his eyes fixed on her hands, and then on her face. There was no judgment, no notes being taken, just attentive observation. He could feel the depth of her experiences in every chord, every pause, every subtle shift in the melody. This was not a performance designed to impress. It was a story being told directly from her heart. When she finished, the hall was quiet, filled with the resonance of the final notes. Lila opened her eyes, unsure if she had done enough. The CEO remained silent for a long moment, studying her. Then he spoke, his voice low but firm. "You have shown more than talent," he said. "You have shown courage. You have shared your heart, and that is something rare. Most people play for applause, for recognition, or for validation. You play to speak, to connect, and to be honest. That is what makes your music unforgettable." Lila felt a warmth spread through her chest. No one had ever said such words to her. No one had ever acknowledged her courage, her feelings, or the depth of her experience. She realized that her music had become a bridge, not just to the CEO, but to a world that could finally see her for who she truly was. The CEO stood and walked toward her. He gestured for her to follow him to a quiet corner of the hall, where a small piano and several sheets of music were laid out. "I want to challenge you now," he said. "I want you to create something completely new, something that reflects your imagination, your hopes, and your fears. Take all that you are and put it into this piece." Lila approached the piano with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. She had never composed in front of anyone before, and the idea of doing so was both thrilling and intimidating. She took a deep breath, closed her eyes, and let her mind wander through memories, dreams, and emotions. Her fingers touched the keys, and a soft, tentative melody began to emerge. It was slow at first, hesitant, but gradually grew in confidence. She explored different harmonies, experimented with rhythm, and allowed her emotions to guide the flow of the music. Each note was deliberate, each pause meaningful. The melody told the story of a lonely child who had faced hardships but never lost hope, of a heart that had been broken yet remained open, and of a spirit ready to embrace a future full of possibilities. The CEO listened intently, leaning forward slightly. He did not interrupt, nor did he offer any instructions. He simply let the music speak, letting Lila's heart be heard. As the melody unfolded, he could feel the authenticity in every note, the courage behind every hesitation, and the hope embedded in every crescendo. When the final note faded into silence, Lila sat back, exhausted but exhilarated. Her hands trembled slightly, but her heart felt lighter. She had poured herself completely into the music, and now there was nothing left to hold back. The CEO remained quiet for a moment, then slowly approached her. "You have done something extraordinary," he said. "Not because of technique or perfection, but because of honesty and courage. That is something far more valuable than skill alone. You have touched my heart, and I can see your potential, not just as a musician but as a person." Lila felt tears prick her eyes. She had dreamed of this moment, hoped for it, but never imagined it could feel so real. Her music had finally been seen, and her heart had finally been heard. She realized that her life was about to change and that she had the strength to face whatever came next. The CEO gestured toward a chair beside him. "Sit," he said. "There is something important I need to tell you." Lila sat, her hands folded nervously in her lap. She looked at him, waiting. "I have promised to adopt a child who can move me with music," he began. "I made that promise because I believe that talent and heart should be nurtured, and that every child deserves a chance. After listening to you and witnessing your courage, I am certain that you are the one I wish to bring into my life." Lila's eyes widened. She could hardly believe the words. Her heart raced and her hands shook slightly. You mean, you really want to adopt me?" she whispered. He nodded. "Yes, but it is not just about adoption. It is about giving you a home, support, guidance, and a chance to grow in every way possible. I want you to be safe, happy, and able to explore your music to its fullest potential." For a moment, Lila could hardly speak. She thought about the orphanage, about the children she would leave behind, and about the life she had always dreamed of. Then she nodded slowly, tears welling in her eyes. I would like that," she said softly. "I want to try. I want to learn. I want a family." The CEO smiled gently. "You will have more than that," he said. "You will have guidance, love, and the opportunity to pursue your dreams. But you must promise me one thing." "What is that?" she asked. "Always be honest in your music," he said. "Never play to impress others. Play to express yourself, your story, and your heart. That is what makes you unique and what will carry you far in life." Lila nodded. "I promise," she said, her voice steady despite the tears. "I will always play from my heart." The CEO extended his hand and she took it. It was a simple gesture, but it carried weight. A promise of a new beginning. A life filled with hope, guidance, and the chance to grow. In the days that followed, arrangements were made for Lila's transition from the orphanage to the CEO's home. Staff helped prepare her, packing her few belongings and explaining what to expect. She felt nervous about leaving the only place she had ever known, but she also felt a deep sense of excitement. She was about to step into a life she had never dared to imagine. The orphanage staff were both happy and sad. They had watched her grow, seen her courage, and nurtured her talents. They hugged her tightly and whispered words of encouragement. "Remember, Lila," the caretaker said, "your music is your heart. Keep it strong and it will guide you wherever you go." Lila promised she would. She carried the words with her as she stepped into a new chapter of her life, holding on to the melody that had brought her this far. The journey was just beginning. There would be challenges, lessons to learn, and moments of doubt. But Lila knew one thing for certain. She had courage, a heart full of music, and someone who believed in her. That combination, she realized, could carry her farther than she had ever dreamed. That evening, as she settled into her new room, she placed her hands on the piano the CEO had set up for her. The keys were smooth, the sound clear, and she felt a rush of possibility. She played softly, letting the notes tell her story once more. A story of hope, courage, and the promise of a new life. For the first time, Lila felt truly at home. The first morning in her new home felt strange yet comforting. Lila woke up in a room that was hers alone, with soft sunlight streaming through the window. She could hear birds singing outside, a sound she hadn't paid much attention to at the orphanage. Everything around her was unfamiliar, the furniture, the quiet calm, the large space. But for the first time, it felt safe. She got out of bed and walked slowly to the piano that stood in the corner. Her fingers hovered above the keys and she let herself play a soft melody. It was the song she had always played at the orphanage, the one she had written in memory of her mother. The notes felt different here, richer, fuller, and somehow freer. It wasn't just the sound, it was the feeling of being heard, of being understood. After breakfast, the CEO appeared in the room. He smiled gently, holding a cup of tea. "Good morning," he said. "I thought we could start the day together. Music first, then a few things to help you settle in." Lila nodded, feeling a mix of excitement and nerves. She realized that life here would not just be easy. There would be rules, lessons, and new responsibilities. But there was also care, guidance, and someone who believed in her. She felt ready to face it. They sat together at the piano. The CEO encouraged her to play anything that came to her mind. Lila closed her eyes and let her fingers flow, creating a melody that was soft, thoughtful, and full of hope. The sound filled the room, carrying with it the stories of the past and the dreams of the future. When she finished, the CEO looked at her with admiration. "You're learning quickly," he said. "Not just in skill, but in understanding what music can do. It is not only sound. It is connection, expression, and even healing." Lila smiled faintly. She had never thought of music that way before. At the orphanage, it had been her escape, her private comfort. Here she realized it could also be a way to touch others, to communicate feelings that words could never express. Over the next days, Lila settled into her new routine. She learned about her new home, explored the library full of books, and practiced on the piano whenever she could. Sometimes she felt lonely or unsure. She missed the children at the orphanage and wondered how they were doing. But she reminded herself that she could still care for them in her own way. One afternoon, the CEO asked her to perform a small piece for a few invited friends and colleagues. It was not a competition. It was simply a chance for her to share her music in this new environment. Lila felt nervous. She had performed before, but this was different. These were strangers who would listen carefully, and she wanted to make them understand her music the way she understood it. She took a deep breath and began to play. The melody started softly, gentle and reflective, then grew into a series of harmonies that carried both emotion and energy. The audience listened quietly, captivated by the honesty in her playing. They were not judging her by skill alone. They were feeling the story she was telling through the keys. When she finished, there was silence for a moment, then applause. It was not the loud, overwhelming kind that she had imagined as a child. It was steady, thoughtful, and respectful. The CEO smiled at her, his expression filled with pride. "You see," he said quietly, "music does not need to impress to move. It only needs to be honest." Lila felt tears well up but held them back. She realized that every moment of doubt, every lonely night of practice had led her here. She had not only learned to play, she had learned to trust herself and her story. That evening, as she practiced alone, she thought about her life so far. She remembered the orphanage, her mother's brief presence in her life, the nights she had spent composing songs in silence, and the journey that had brought her to this home. She realized that everything, every struggle, every moment of loneliness, every note played in the quiet, had prepared her for this opportunity. The CEO entered quietly. "You are improving," he said, watching her fingers glide over the keys. "But more importantly, you are finding your own voice. That is the greatest gift you can have." Lila nodded, feeling a warmth in her heart. She understood that her music was not just a skill to be admired. It was an expression of herself, a reflection of her life, and a way to touch others. She had learned to play not just for herself, but for those who might listen and feel the same emotions she had felt. Days turned into weeks. Lila became more comfortable in her new home. She learned the daily routines, helped with small tasks, and spent hours at the piano. Sometimes she would compose new pieces late into the night, letting her imagination and emotions guide her. The CEO continued to encourage her, offering guidance without pressure, letting her find her own path in music and in life. One day, he asked her to play a song she had composed herself. She sat at the piano, fingers trembling slightly. She remembered the words he had said on the first day. "Play from your heart, not to impress." She closed her eyes and let the music flow. The melody was soft at first, reflective, then it grew with confidence, full of hope, courage, and emotion. Each note carried her story: the lonely nights at the orphanage, the memory of her mother, her journey to this home, and the dreams she now dared to dream. The sound filled the room, powerful yet gentle, honest yet expressive. When the final note faded, the CEO remained quiet for a moment. Then he smiled. "That," he said softly, "is the music of someone who has found themselves. That is the heart of a true musician." Lila felt tears stream down her face. For the first time, she understood the meaning of her journey. It was not just about being adopted, about moving to a new home, or even about playing well. It was about finding her own voice, expressing her heart, and realizing that she could matter in the world. Over the next few months, her life became a balance of learning, music, and exploration. She took lessons to improve her technique, composed new pieces, and shared her music with others. She made friends in her new environment, people who listened, encouraged, and inspired her. She also kept in touch with the orphanage, sending letters and music to the children she had left behind, reminding herself that even as her life changed, her heart remained connected to those she had cared about. The CEO continued to support her, not just as a guardian but as a mentor. He encouraged her to explore, make mistakes, and grow. He reminded her that courage and honesty were more important than perfection, and that music was a way to share her story with the world. One evening, as the sun set and the room filled with golden light, Lila sat at the piano and began to play. The notes were soft, flowing, and filled with a sense of completion. She realized that her journey was far from over, but she had grown stronger, braver, and more certain of herself. The music she created now carried not just her past but her dreams, her courage, and the hope for a future she could finally embrace. The CEO entered quietly, listening without interrupting. When she finished, he approached her with a gentle smile. "You have come a long way," he said, "not just in skill but in understanding what it means to create, to feel, and to share. Your journey is just beginning, and I am proud to be part of it." Lila smiled, feeling a warmth she had never known. She realized that home was not just a place but a feeling of being accepted, understood, and loved. Her music had brought her here, but it was her courage, her heart, and her honesty that had made it possible. That night she lay in her new room, thinking about the journey that had brought her from the orphanage to this home. She thought about the challenges she had faced, the loneliness she had endured, and the music that had always been her companion. She understood that every note she had played, every melody she had created, and every moment she had faced fear with courage had led her to this point. As she drifted off to sleep, she imagined the future, a life filled with music, love, growth, and endless possibilities. She knew there would be challenges, but she also knew that she had the strength to face them. Her journey was not just about being adopted. It was about discovering herself, her voice, and the power of her heart. For the first time, Lila felt truly whole. She had found a home, a family, and a way to express the depth of her soul through music. And as she dreamed, she knew that her story was only just beginning. A story of courage, hope, and the remarkable power of a heart willing to play its truth. She would always remember the journey, the orphanage, the lonely nights, the first song, the unexpected opportunity, and the promise that had changed her life. But most importantly, she would remember the lesson that had guided her every step. Play from your heart, and the world will listen. Lila closed her eyes, letting the soft echoes of her own melody lull her into sleep. In the quiet of the night, she felt peace, joy, and the certainty that her music, her courage, and her heart would carry her far, farther than she had ever imagined.